Last March, we were driving to Seattle for Emerald City Comic Con, me and my son and his friend from school. We'd been on the road for hours when we decided to stop for dinner in this really small town. After getting slightly lost due to our GPS giving terrible directions, we finally made it to the restaurant. After dinner, we noticed across the street that there was a small music festival happening, so we checked it out for fun. It was getting dark, and the festival was winding down, but a local rock band was just setting up for the final performance. We hadn't been to a live music show together in ages, so we thought it might be a fun break from all the driving. We stood by the outdoor stage and listened for a while. There were a lot of families there watching, and also a lot of drunk people as well. I didn't think anything of it. We decided to leave the festival before the performance was over so as not to be on the road at night with the drunks. We walked back to the restaurant, which was now closed, and got into our car to continue our trip. Since my son needed driving practice with his permit, I let him take the wheel while I sat in the passenger seat to guide him. I noticed that as soon as we pulled out of the restaurant, there was a car behind us, the only other car on the road, as most of the town's inhabitants were most likely at the festival or at home. The car followed us onto the highway route, which I found odd because it was a desolate backhill road with a wooded area on either side. I thought maybe they too were heading to Seattle and were using the same route to get to the interstate, as it was convention season and many people were road tripping. I still felt uneasy about it, but I told my son to just get off this road and onto the interstate as soon as possible. As we were driving on this hilly back road, it was fully dark outside, and I instructed my son to drive slowly for fear of a deer running out in front of us. The car stayed right behind us, so I suggested to my son that he slow down even more, hoping the driver would just get annoyed enough to pass us. Instead, the car drove right up on our bumper, tailgating aggressively. I could see that it was only one person in the car and that the windows were tinted. I told my son to carefully speed up, wanting to get onto a main road or the interstate as soon as we could. The car stayed right behind us, matching our speed, never getting off our bumper. I knew without a doubt we were being harassed. I was getting concerned but tried to stay calm for my son's sake. I mean, he was still learning to drive, and this was supposed to be a fun trip to Comic-Con. This was unfair, and I regretted stopping at the music festival. Of course, I could not have predicted this craziness. After what seemed like ages, I directed my son onto the interstate. I had hoped it was just some local jerk who wanted to scare some out-of-towners, but I somehow knew it was not that simple. As I feared, the car followed us onto the interstate. Even on the highway, it tailgated us. I told my son to slow down at first, hoping the driver would just pass us. No luck. I then instructed him to speed up a bit. The car caught up and stayed too close. Unfortunately, the interstate was quiet in our direction, so we had no choice but to keep going. My son's friend in the back seat was getting very angry and saying he wanted to confront this guy, but I firmly told him that wasn't an option. I just coached my son to keep driving steady and prayed we wouldn't get a flat tire. At one point, I got worried enough to tell my son to honk the horn while driving, hoping the noise would discourage our pursuer. It actually worked. The car pulled over onto the shoulder, and I saw its headlights turn off. I was relieved at first, but we found it strange that the driver killed the lights. After driving a few more miles, I asked my son to pull over at a well-lit rest area so we could switch seats. He was visibly shaken by the encounter, and I thought it would be better if I took over driving for the rest of the journey. After that, I got behind the wheel and picked up speed, and we were hurrying towards Seattle. The sooner the better. About 15 minutes passed in peaceful uneventfulness. We discussed how scary that whole ordeal was and eventually started feeling relieved to put it all behind us. Literally. We were about 40 minutes from Seattle, and there were a couple of vehicles here and there, which made us feel less alone on the road. At one point, when the traffic thinned out and we were once again alone on the road, something happened that I could not believe. Right next to us and slightly behind us, headlights suddenly turned on. The driver had most likely been following us that whole time with the lights off, probably waiting just outside the rest area until we got back on the road, then shadowing us until the right moment to strike again. I almost shouted, but at this point, I was too angry. This person had been following us for over an hour now. Far ahead of us, I spotted the taillights of a big rig. I sped up steadily, with the stalker in the car next to us, trying to maintain our pace from the fast lane. I think the driver realized that we were trying to reach the big rig, because for the first time in this insane chase, they did something truly dangerous. They swerved at our rear panel, attempting a pit maneuver, trying to push us off the road. I floored the accelerator, and we missed being hit by inches. We finally caught up to the big rig driver, and I got close, hugging the back of the truck as much as I dared, and leaving no room for this person to cut us off. We stayed like this for a little while. Finally, and I truly believe this big rig driver sensed something was wrong, he did something I will always thank him for. He swerved over onto the fast lane and dangerously cut off the stalker's car, then tapped his brakes. I took it as our opportunity and sped ahead from the slow lane to escape. I pushed the speedometer to around 90. Seattle was just ahead, so I took a sharp right exit onto a side street that led to a main road and pulled into a busy, well-lit gas station. Luckily, there was a police officer there. I got out and explained the whole situation to the officer, who called for other units to search for this vehicle. We left the gas station after calling another friend who lived in Seattle to meet us at a parking garage where we left our car overnight, because I didn't want the stalker to potentially find our hotel by recognizing the vehicle. Just glad we made it to the convention safely despite everything. I was also thankful that I decided to take over driving when I did. The most disturbing part about this whole story is that the small town with the music festival where this all started happens to be the location of one of the largest psychiatric facilities in the Pacific Northwest. This fact has kept me awake more nights than I'd like to admit. "1:47, according to the digital clock on our SUV's dashboard. That time is burned into my memory forever. It was our first family road trip, with my wife and 2 kids in the car. We normally just fly to vacation spots and do the usual theme parks, but this year we decided to try something different by driving to a campground up north. Traveling at night seemed like a good idea since the kids would sleep through most of it. My wife had dozed off in the passenger seat about an hour ago, and both kids were bundled up with their travel pillows in the back. I was the only one awake, listening to the radio at a low volume, trying to stay alert on these unfamiliar roads. Our GPS had taken us on some back route to supposedly save time, but I was starting to regret following it. These back roads were pretty isolated, with no streetlights and hardly any other vehicles, making it easy to miss animals or obstacles that might appear suddenly. That's why I kept our speed reasonable, never going above 30. I had checked the paper map earlier and figured we still had about 3 more hours before reaching the campground. This was back in the late 90s, before smartphones and GPS were common, so we relied on paper maps for these long drives. The kids were excited about sleeping in a tent for the first time, though I wondered if they'd still be so enthusiastic once they encountered the reality of outdoor living. As the road bent right, I noticed a line of reflective markers appearing ahead, which I soon realized were orange safety cones, along with a flashing red light in the distance. In front of them was someone wearing what looked like a reflective jacket. I was so confused about what was happening on this empty road that I almost didn't brake in time. The SUV came to a halting stop with a loud screech of tires, and the person in the reflective jacket started approaching our vehicle, motioning with his hands. I assumed he was signaling for me to stay put. My wife stirred at the sudden stop, but didn't fully wake up. The kids remained asleep in the back, undisturbed by the commotion. As the figure got closer, I could make out what seemed to be a sheriff's uniform under the jacket. He tapped on my window with his knuckle, which I took as a signal to roll it down. I lowered the window, getting a better look at the man's face. He was white, around 6'2", heavy-set, clean-shaven, and wearing dark sunglasses despite it being night. He looked middle-aged, probably in his 40s. He spoke in a strangely quiet voice that didn't match his official appearance. He told me he needed to see my license and registration. I hesitated before asking what the problem was, since I was definitely following the speed limit. His quiet voice at least meant he wouldn't wake my sleeping family. He paused briefly, glanced toward my back seat where my kids were sleeping, then back at me. The way he looked at my children made me uncomfortable instantly. He explained that this was a routine checkpoint for drunk drivers, again in that soft voice. I questioned why he needed my identification if I wasn't suspected of anything yet. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I couldn't exactly place what it was. He straightened up and instructed me to step out of the vehicle for a field sobriety test. I opened my door and got out, trying not to wake my family. I considered waking my wife to let her know what was happening, but decided against it to avoid alarming her unnecessarily. He went back to his vehicle and grabbed what looked to be a 20-foot length of rope, then laid it on the ground, stretching it out. I wondered why a police officer would use rope instead of a standard line for a sobriety test, but I didn't voice my concern. He instructed me to stand at one end of the rope with my arms extended outward and walk straight across. I completed the test without difficulty, with the man following unusually close behind me the entire time. His proximity made the hair on my neck stand up, but I tried to stay calm. When I reached the end of the rope, I had a clearer view of that red flashing light. It wasn't mounted on any official vehicle. It was sitting on top of an old pickup truck. There were no markings on the truck that would indicate it belonged to any law enforcement agency. I turned to him and requested to see his identification. He just stared at me with an expressionless face. The realization hit me hard, and I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest. This man wasn't a real sheriff. He mumbled something I couldn't quite hear, and as he walked toward his truck, I think he said he needed to get something from his vehicle. I glanced back at my SUV, measuring the distance and calculating how quickly I could get back to it. He was leaning into his truck, reaching for something inside. While he was distracted, I sprinted back to our SUV. I heard him shout something behind me, but I didn't stop to listen. He spotted me as I started the engine, and he pulled out what looked like a gun. The expression on his face changed completely, from blank to furious in an instant. Without hesitation, I floored the accelerator and crashed through the line of safety cones. The noise finally woke my wife, who looked around in confusion and alarm. She asked what was happening as the kids also began to wake up in the back seat. I quickly explained that we were in danger and needed to get away as fast as possible. I saw the headlights of his truck turn on in my rearview mirror as I sped away, but by then I was already pushing 70, and there was no chance he could catch up. My wife was fully awake now and trying to calm the children, who had been startled by the sudden commotion. I turned off at the first intersection I saw, and once we reached a populated area with streetlights, I dimmed my headlights to be less noticeable for the remainder of our drive. We found a motel shortly after and checked in for the night, too shaken to continue driving. We still went to the campground the next day, but the entire vacation was overshadowed by what had happened. We never went on another road trip after that night. Last month, I visited Colorado with my husband by car. The trip going there went fine. We started driving after dinner and reached our hotel when the sun came up. In the town we were staying in, we walked around, got food a few times, and stopped for coffee at some small cafe. Most of the time was spent at the hotel, watching TV or waiting to go eat again. Nothing too exciting, just a typical trip for us. For our return trip, we took off at dawn and spent most of our time driving in daylight. The drive was about 6 hours each way, not including stops. We made one quick stop for gas, then another stop later for food. We got off the highway at like 5:45 in the afternoon and went to the nearest Burger King for a meal. We got right back on the highway after that. He ate while he drove, which I wasn't too fond of, but he just wanted to get home sooner rather than later. Shortly after getting back on the highway, it started to snow. I forced him to pull over. I didn't want him eating and driving in poor conditions. As he pulled to the side, it actually started to turn into a blizzard. He finished up eating his food, and then we heard a scratch sound at the window. At first, I chalked it up to noises from the storm. But when I looked over to see a figure blocking 75% of the driver's window, I let out a shriek and nearly passed out. He didn't want to roll down the window, given how cold it was outside. But over the sound of the howling wind beating against the car, we couldn't hear what the person was saying. He ended up having to roll the window down a bit and yelled out to the person, who turned out to be a teenage girl. She was freezing already and looked exhausted and frightened. She asked for a ride. My husband knew he had to help her in these conditions. He told her to get in the back seat. I gave him a look. It was definitely a why the hell would you let in a stranger kind of look. He asked the girl where she was heading. She didn't respond. I gave him another look because of this. He ignored me and turned around to look at the girl in the back seat, assuming she didn't hear him. But as disturbing as it was, she was actually staring right at him with a cold, hostile expression. I'd say it was an emotionless face, but something about it was just alarming. He repeated his question, and she just tilted her head and stared. He looked at me, and I stared right back at him. He said out loud that he'd be dropping her off at the next exit we passed. I guess he was announcing that to both me and the girl. As we got back onto the empty highway, there was a sudden high-pitched laughing sound coming from right behind him. The girl sitting behind him suddenly wrapped a scarf around his throat. He slammed on the brakes as he was struggling to breathe, almost sliding into a tree. I looked around for something to use as a weapon. I saw my husband had left the car keys in the center console. Thank God for keyless ignition. I grabbed the keys and turned around and jabbed at the girl's eyes. The laughing turned from a manic, gleeful kind of sound to screams of pain and rage. Then my husband got out of the car. The girl now had her hands pressed up against her face, howling in pain. Then my husband opened the back door, grabbed the girl with both hands, and forcefully pulled her out of the car into the snow. She started pleading, repeatedly whimpering for help, over and over again as he looked down at her. But that's all she said. She sobbed as she kept saying the word help. He ignored her and got back into the car and locked it. As he put the car in drive, there were scratches at the window as the girl started laughing again. Her laughter once again sounded like the cackles of someone completely unhinged. Then my husband drove us away quickly. She was no longer a real threat, or at least not that we knew of. I quickly got on the phone with the highway patrol and warned them of some dangerous, unstable girl lurking around the highway. We kept driving without stopping anywhere else. We drove straight to our house after that. The whole thing messed us up for a while, but we got over it sooner or later.